Hi everyone. In part 2 of this tutorial, I'm going to be showing how to set up buttons in Unity. I'm going to be starting right where part 1 left off, so I have already imported some button images and a font. And the font I chose in the last video is the font that I want to use for the title, so I am going to import a second font that I want to be a little more readable. That will be the font that I use on my actual buttons. So I've come back to my fonts folder on my computer, and I'm just looking for one that is really readable, because you want text that's on buttons to be not have too fancy of a font. So I'll import a second font. This one came in with several different options. So it has a bold version and a regular version. So I have a few different options now that I can choose between for that specific font, and I might try a few different versions and see which one I like on top of the buttons. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete the buttons, the images I had previously put in my scene. So these were the buttons that I put on as images so that I could see what they look like. But now I'm ready to actually set up a button, so I'm going to delete those. And I'm going to go to Game Object, UI, and Button. Now the button object from the UI menu comes in with a few different things already attached to it. So it has image, which is the exact same as the image that I was using before. So when I used UI image, this image component is the same as the image component attached to this type of object. The other things it comes in with is it has this button script, which allows me to add an on-click function. This is the thing that happens when I click on a button, and it has some interactable stuff to change what the button looks like when you hover over and press. So if I just use this default button just to see what happens, if I hit play, then I can see when I hover over, it's a very slight change, but there is a tint there. And then when I click, you can see that it changes quite a bit to this darker gray. So the button default comes with this tint highlight and pressed color. If you wanted to change it just so you could see a little more obviously, I could make these like pretty distinctly different colors just so we can see the difference. And now if I hit play, now I can see the hover over and the pressed are all very different. Now you might notice once you've clicked on something, you can't hover over it anymore. That's because it has now, essentially it's been selected. So that's the selected color here. Normally when you press a button in Unity, it's going to be taking you to another screen or popping something up. So this isn't a huge issue, but it is something that you might notice when you first start setting up your buttons, that once you have hovered over something and clicked on it, you can't hover over it again. If you click somewhere else, then the hover over comes back, because clicking somewhere else on the screen is deselecting that button. But like I said, when we're adding functionality to our buttons, usually buttons will be having some kind of effect that will make this irrelevant for the most part. So I'm going to exit play mode. It's really important that you exit play mode when you're making changes in the Unity scene. If you make changes while you're in play mode, it is not saving those changes. And so if you start working on something and you notice you have the play button pressed, you are probably going to lose some of your work. The other thing that I haven't done yet is I haven't saved my scene. The default when you open Unity, it's called sample scene, which is here in your scenes folder. I usually like to save my scene as something else so I can find it easily. So I'll go to save as. I am going to put it in my scenes folder. I mentioned in the first video, it's really important that everything for your Unity project stays in your Unity project folder. So this is my UI demo project folder, and everything I work with should go in the assets folder. And then inside of the scenes folder, this is where I would save my scenes. You want to be very careful that you are not browsing somewhere else, like saving them to your documents or your desktop, because then Unity can no longer access those files. So I am going to save my scene. I'm going to save it in the scenes folder. I'll call it my UI scene. And now if I double click on the scenes folder, I can see I now have two scenes in here. Since I never saved it before, if I double click on the sample scene right now, this takes me back to the blank sample scene, which is what I started with. And so if at any point you close your project and reopen it and you don't see anything you worked on, make sure you go to your scenes folder and find the scene that you saved. This has all of the work that you've done so far. So now I'm going to replace the button art assets. So I will click the little triangle next to canvas to toggle it open. The text, this is the game title up at the top, and the button, this is the button here. And I'm going to first position it to be in the center of my screen. Rather than dragging it with the arrows, you can set the X position and Y position. And if you click the triangle next to button, you'll see beneath that is a text, and you can change the text on this button. Maybe this is my start button. And the font for this text is the default Arial. Now I could click the circle here and choose a different font, and you can preview it right away when you select it. So I can look through the different fonts that I've imported and find the one that I think will look best for my buttons. I think I like this one here. And I also want to increase my font size so it is a little bit more readable. And I want to replace the button image with my button image. So if I go to the top, the button object here, and where I see the source image UI sprite, this is the default button sprite that Unity comes with. And I want to use my button sprite instead. So I'm going to take my button, the up state, and I'm going to drag it onto my source image. And you can see it is stretched not the way that I want it. Just like in the previous demo, we can choose set native size, and it will use the import settings of the resolution of this image and make adjustments accordingly. Now that I've set the size of that, I can see my start button is actually, or my start text is actually too small now. So I could go to my text and increase this size until it is large enough. It also feels to me like it's a little bit too low on the button. If I go to the game window, I can take a look and see this doesn't feel quite right. So I might want to raise it a little bit, which you can do just by dragging it slightly on the button. And now it is pretty well centered in the height of the button. And if I hit play right now, I actually still have the color change hover over. So a quick and easy way to start with buttons is you can just keep the hover over effect and choose the colors you want it to change. That is one option. That is one way that you can do the buttons. Another way that you can do the buttons is you can replace them with your hover over and pressed button states that you created as images. So if I select my button, and if I go to this buttons section here, the transition is color tint. This is the default. And instead of this, I can do Sprite Swap. Now Sprite Swap gives me a bunch of different slots for sprites. And so here's where I would drag in my highlighted version, my pressed version, and selected and disabled. I did not make special versions for this, so I'm just going to use my regular one for selected, and I'm actually not going to put anything in disabled right now. We might at some point have a disabled version if our button cannot be selected, but I don't have that right now, so I'm just going to leave that blank. And if I hit play now I can see here's my hover over state. I added this glow around the button to let you know it's hovered over. And then when I click, it shows the button being pressed down. And when I release, it's back to the up state. Now, I probably want to have multiple buttons on my screen here. So since I've already set this one up, what I can do is I can Control D to duplicate and place several buttons here. And I can change the text for each of them. So maybe my middle button is options and my bottom button is exit. PC games, normally I will have an exit button to quit the experience. this is another case where things are different for mobile. Mobile games do not use exit buttons. Apple in particular does not allow exit buttons in their games. So for mobile devices, normally the user hits the home button on their phone, and that is how they close out of an app, or rather they suspend the app in the background. So now if I hit play, I could hover over each of my buttons and I can click on them, and they all have this effect. The other option from the button interactivity, so the default was color, tint, and then I showed Sprite Swap. The final one is animation, and this would allow you to change things like having the button animate between different states, so you could maybe have it scale up, or you could change different effects about it. So if you choose animation, you would hit auto generate animation, and I'm just going to leave this what it default wants to call it, and I'll save that. And now I have this button animation here, which I can edit from Unity's animation window, which is under Window, Animation, and then Animation again. So Animator is what controls which state something is going to, and the animation is what changes what it looks like or how it behaves in that state. So just to show, I'm going to first open the Animator. So this is what was created when I hit the create button, or the automatic button rather. And so it created these different states. So the default state is normal, and then here's my highlighted, my pressed, my selected, and my disabled. So this allows me to animate what those states will look like. So right now this is set up to trigger which one is going to be played. I don't actually want to change anything here. This is all controlled by the button functionality. So instead, what I actually want to do is I want to go to the, with my button selected, I'm going to go to the animation window, which is going to allow me to change what the button looks like in those different states. I like to drag my animation window down here to the bottom so that it is locked into my screen. And still with the button selected, I can look at these different, the different states, and I'm going to choose first highlighted, and I can add property, and here I can change my image, and I would probably want to change my sprite first. And so if you open this up, you can see it has the default sprite image here, which is the initial one. And so I would want to replace that with my hover over state. So I'm going to drag my animation window up here so that I can edit it and still have access to the things that I have down here. So I'm going to delete this end keyframe here and switch it to my hover over. And the other thing that you can do if you're doing the animations this way is you could also change the text. So if I choose the text down here, this is the text that is attached to my button, and I could change the text color. And again, I'll click this little triangle to open this up. And what I would want to do is I would want to delete the end keyframe. I'm selected on the text color line here. I would delete that and change the colors here to what I want the color to look like. And so 111 would be white, 000 would be black, and then I could choose if I want it to be more red or blue or green. So I could maybe make it a bluish green color. And you'll notice it does create these keyframes for me when I'm adjusting the color. Or maybe I actually want it to be sort of a yellow color. Maybe I want it to match the glow around it. So I have some options with what I could do here. And so I'm not too concerned right now with what the visuals look like because I'm just trying to set up this functionality. But if I drag along here, I can see how that animation is going to look. So the color has a very smooth transition, but the button sort of snaps to that different state. So maybe what I want is, now I'm going to drag my animation window back down here so I can zoom in on it. So maybe what I want to do is have the highlight actually happen right away. So you can drag keyframes around. Maybe I want all of it to happen much more quickly. So I don't really want too much of a transition. And I could also, at this point, scale my button. So this would still, this would be under the rect transform, and I could use the scale here. Now, like I said before, scaling things, UI elements in Unity can make them look pixelated, so I really don't want to scale it very much. But I'm gonna, once again, I'm gonna come to the end here and I'm gonna delete the final keyframe for scale. I am selecting just scale. I'm making sure that I'm not selecting the color down here. So I could delete this and maybe make my X value 1.2. So now I have that smooth transition here, and I could hit play. Whoa, it is looping. That is why it is happening like that. So I can test this out. I can just hit play in Unity, and I can see, oh, it is still set to looping. So I can make that animation not loop by selecting, if I use this arrow under the button, I can select highlight and I can uncheck the box for loop time. Now if I hit play, now I can see that it's a pretty smooth transition. But my clicked version does not have an animation yet. So right now when I click on it, it just animates back to the normal, just like when I'm hovering over and away. So I would, if I'm going to use this, I would also want to go to my animation window again, and from the normal drop down, I've done highlighted, and now I would want to do pressed. And so here I would want to use my image and choose sprite, hit the plus next to sprite. And once again, I'm gonna snap this up here, and I'm going to delete my end keyframe there, and I'm going to replace it with my pressed down version. And so this was under my pressed state, so now if I hit play, I can test this out. I think it is also looping that pressed state. Yeah, so I want to uncheck this box. And I think I probably want that to last a little bit longer. I think I made it too short. So I go to my animation window and once again choose pressed. And I'll take this all the way out to 1. So that's 1 second. I see the problem now. I actually used the same sprite by accident. So I'm just going to drag this up here again, and I want to drag in my pressed down state. I was mistakenly using the same default sprite. So now I have my pressed down button. And I think I want to move this to the start. So I want this to happen right away, but then I do want it to stay pressed down for a while. So I am going to bring in a second instance of that. So it will maintain the pressed down for a little bit longer. And I just realized I was in play mode while I made those changes. The animation functionality thankfully does actually save. The main things that don't save when you're in play mode is manipulating things in the scene view. So it does still have my change for the pressed down state. So I'm going to try that again. And I think I want the transition there to happen a little bit faster. So now I might actually go into the Animator where I have these are my transitions. And here you can control how quickly the different transitions happen. So my transition to highlighted, I can see it here. I could move these closer to the start of this animation, or rather I want this part here to be narrower so that transition happens faster. And then the pressed, I also want that to happen more quickly. And now let's go back into the game view and see how that works. So now all of that happens a bit faster. The one other thing I think I might want to do is with my button selected on that pressed state, I'm actually going to delete this first frame that is showing the original button, and instead I'm going to have the first frame of my pressed to be the very first frame, and I am going to actually shorten this a little bit. And now I'll hit play and test that one more time. So that is how you'd use the animation version, and the other buttons I still have using the regular Sprite Swap. Usually if I make sprites, I prefer to just use the Sprite Swap option. I normally use the Animate version if I am not making different sprites. But you can have some fun with the Animate version, and particularly if you want to change the color of the font, that is the easiest way to do that. So that is how to set up buttons using Unity's button system for the canvas. In later tutorials, I will show how to add actual scripted functionality so we can have buttons that take you to the next screen or pop up menus. But for now, this is just the basics that are able to be set up with the Unity canvas. The one other thing that I want to mention is for my buttons, I left all of them in the center, but if I was going to have, say I was going to have my start menu buttons left or right justified, then I would want to change where they are bound to. So right now they are all bound around the center, but just like I did with the title text, I would want to choose the nearest edge. So in this case, I would choose the left edge here with where the yellow dot is on the left edge. And I would want to do that for all three of my buttons. So you want to make sure that whenever you're placing UI elements on the screen that you bind them to the nearest edge. You should only use the center binding if you want the objects to stay in the center of the screen. One last thing that I didn't show yet was how to use the slicing for buttons. Particularly if you have a flat button, like I have this green one down here that just has a black outline. And what's interesting that you can do, this isn't limited to buttons. I'll actually demonstrate it with the panel option, but it would also work with the button option. But I'm going to create a panel here, and if I take my green button here and drag it into this source image, you can see that it is stretched, and what we've been normally doing at this point is set native size, which would make it very small. But that's not what you normally want to do with panels. So what you can do instead is, if I select this art asset, this only works with flat UI. If you have gradients or, well, if you have bevels just around the edge, it would probably still work pretty well. But it works best with just a solid interior color. And what you can do with that object selected is go to the Sprite Editor, and you can slice this sprite by dragging these edges. And what you want to do is line them up with where the curve starts here on the button. And so I will bring these in like this and bring the top and bottom down as well. And when you hit close, it will ask if you want to apply this change, and I do. And now it has these slices applied to it. And so what I can do is, with my panel selected, from the image type here, instead of simple, I can choose sliced. And now you can see it has adjusted so that the center fills in with whatever is the center color, and it makes the edges adhere to the way that I had it sliced. So it keeps that rounded edge of the corner. It does not stretch the boundary edges. So this is a great thing to do with panels. It does also work with buttons. Normally when you have a panel, you want to drag it to the top right below canvas so that it's behind everything else. The order in the hierarchy determines whether things are in front or behind each other. So the top part of the canvas, this is stuff that is to the back. So now that I have done the slicing for this green button, I am just going to very quickly set up another button. And here I can replace the source image with this button. And since it is set to, it is sliced, what I can do is when I adjust the width and height of this button, you can see that it very nicely keeps that rounded edge. And this would allow me to use buttons of different sizes or different shapes. With the buttons I made previously that have the gradient, if I were to adjust these, you can see that it is actually stretching that image. And so it really doesn't look good when you stretch images that have a lot of gradients or texturing to them. So this slicing option works great if you have flat images that have a solid interior color. So that covers all of the things that I wanted to show about setting up buttons using the default button system in Unity. I hope you found this helpful, and thanks for joining me in this tutorial.